Well, good morning and Shabbat Shalom and welcome. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, joined this morning by my dear friend and teacher, Rabbi Marc Gellman, and this is Torah study for a Shabbos morning presented to you by Valley Beth Shalom in Encino and the Aspen Jewish Congregation. Mark, good morning. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, my friend. How are you, Ed?
It is 106 degrees here in
I
Southern
can't believe
California.
it.
It is very clear that hell is getting closer.
Absolutely. My daughter, Mara, in LA, there in Westlake Village, is suffering. She said, Dad, I have no words. I have
Yes.
no words to describe this.
It's remarkable, by the way, because it really is so brutally hot that you really can't go outside. And so, listen, we wish everybody a really good Shabbos, but please take care of yourself. Stay inside and protect yourself. We don't want anybody getting hurt. Well, this morning we opened the book of Deuteronomy. We're coming close to the closing parshiot of Deuteronomy because Rosh Hashanah is coming very soon. And the parsha this morning is called Ki Teitzei milchama. When you go out to war, that's the beginning of the parsha. And it's a parsha that I'm told has more law in it, more discrete laws than any other parsha in the Torah. And I would like to suggest that one of the themes that gathers most of these, not all of them, but many of these laws together, is contained in that opening phrase, Ki Teitzei milchama. When you go out into the world, into conflict. These are laws which have to do with human conflicts. They have to do with dissymmetries of power and how we use that power in an ethical way. The concern of the Torah is that we're about to leave the desert. Now, the desert for the ancient Israelites, the desert was a sort of laboratory. It was a controlled environment in which we didn't have to have too much interaction with others. We could work among ourselves to create a vision of a perfect society, of a just society, and of just people. But now you're going to leave that laboratory, or shall we say, leave the classroom, leave the comfort of your study, and go out into the real world. And when you go out into the real world, you're going to encounter a series of moral challenges. And the question is, how do you conduct yourself under those conditions? How do you conduct yourself under conditions of real moral challenge? Everyone is a tzaddik. Everyone is a righteous person in their own mind and in the comfort of their living room. Because in the comfort of their living room, when I'm ensconced in my easy chair with a book, thinking about how the difficulties of the world, I imagine myself as doing the right thing every single time. But it's when you remove the human being from the comfort of the living room and the easy chair, and we move into the world, let's say, of commerce, where we're buying and selling. We move into the world of political structures where power is being negotiated. We move into the world of family where passions and emotions come to bear. How do you conduct yourself under those conditions? And how do you control those passions? And how do you control all of the impulses that come with conflict, with moral conflicts that occur to us on a day-to-day basis? The Torah begins with three of the most difficult circumstances. I would call them worst case scenarios. The first one is a male soldier who encounters a beautiful, helpless woman in the ruins of a city that he's conquered. And he has the question of how he deals with her. The second one is a fellow who Nebuch is married to two women, one he loves and one he doesn't love so much. And the question is, what do you do with the other wife? And the third one is the intransigent child, ben sorer umoreh. What do you do with a loudmouth and intransigent, difficult, stubborn, rebellious, oppositional child? And this we read last week, by the way, Mark and Shul. And I pointed out to the bar mitzvah kid that if he didn't tie his shoes, stand up straight, comb his hair, and be good to his mother, right there in the Torah, it tells us what we're going to do to him. We're going to take him out and stone him to death. He looked at me and said, really? I said, no, but I just want you to remember it, which is what the Talmud tells us to teach, right? The kid tied his shoes, combed his hair, and was very polite to his mother. The question here is, when I'm dealing with the passions and the impulses, with my my deepest reflexes, how do I impose upon those deepest reflexes a moral overlay, which encourages me to stop, to think about what's the right thing to do, to engage in moral reasoning? There's a wonderful social psychologist that I got to meet this year. I actually got to interview him, named Jonathan Haidt, teaches at NYU. And Haidt's wonderful book, The Righteous Mind, he makes the case that morality is largely intuition. That is, we make moral judgments and then we go back and rationalize them with moral reasoning. But that the moral judgment is made immediately based on a framework that we apply to particular situations, a framework that's made up of values and perceptions and perspectives that we're taught when we're very young. But that moral reasoning only comes later. And then the question is, can you slow someone down and ask them to engage in a process of moral reasoning and ask them to really consider what's the right thing to do? Or do we just jump to moral decisions right away and move forward with those moral decisions? And that's one of Jonathan Haidt's very interesting questions. He uses this metaphor of the rider atop an elephant. And the elephant represents our passions. It represents our moral intuitions, our moral reflexes. And the rider represents our rationality. And while the rider thinks that he's the one who's guiding the elephant, that elephant going to go where he wants to go, no matter what that rider wants to do. And that's Haidt's idea about what morality is all about. So among the many different circumstances that this Torah portion presents, I want to take a look at two of them today. One that I chose and one that Rabbi Gellman chose. So the one that I chose has to do with lost and found law. It's a simple circumstance. In fact, for those of us who ever had the opportunity to study Talmud, it's one of the first Talmuds you study as a kid because it's Elam Metzias. It's a Talmud which has to do with, well, you find something on the street. Do you have to give it back, or is it finders keepers? That's a sort of fundamental archetypal moral circumstance. What makes something mine? If I find it, does it belong to the person who lost it? Am I obligated to locate that person? Can I just hold on to it? Certainly my reflex is to hold on to it if it's something I really want. I remember when I was a kid, somebody had left a baseball mitt at the ball field and I found it. I didn't own one at the time. My parents didn't want to buy me one. And here was a gift. It was a baseball mitt. And I so wanted to keep it. And my mom said, no, you got to go find the kid who owns it. And I said, no, he left it. He doesn't care about it. I said, no, I want it. The reflex to hold on to that which we find. Let's take a look inside at the text, okay? I have the text open for us here. In the book of Exodus, we find the following law. When you encounter your enemy's ox or ass wandering, you must take it back to him. Now, the interesting thing is it adds the element of your enemy. So if you find an ox or an ass wandering, you got to bring it back to the owner. But even if it belongs to someone who you can't stand, you have to bring it back. Deuteronomy, which is the section we're reading today, is the following. If you see your fellow's ox or sheep go astray, do not ignore it. You must take it back to the fellow. If your fellow does not live near to you, or you don't know who he is, you're to bring it home, and it shall remain with you until the fellow claims it. Then you shall give it back to him. You'll do the same with his ass, the same with his garment. You do anything that he loses and you find, you must not remain indifferent. Don't hide yourself. It's lo titalim. Don't hide yourself from the circumstance. Okay? And if you see it falling on the road, you have to help. Now, this wonderful law, you see the animal, you have to either bring it back to him, but if you don't know who it is, you hold on to it until you can find the person, which means you have to go and proclaim it. And this is what the Mishnah is going to point out, that you have to make a public notice that, hey, I found an ox. Is anyone missing an ox? And there's a whole story about this. In the Holy Temple of Jerusalem, there was actually a place where you could go. And I guess like a bulletin board, but it was actually a stone that you stood on and you proclaimed, I found something. I found the ox. I found the item. And then it raises so many questions. I mean, the Torah offers you the basic outline of the law. So one of the great exercises that we've done is just like, how many complications can you think of in that circumstance, right? So you find this ox, you have to bring it home. Now, what if you live on a 14th floor apartment in New York? You have to bring the ox home then. Where does the ox live? Suppose you do have a farm and you can bring the ox. You have to feed the ox. How much you obligated to feed the ox? What if the ox is sick? You have to call an ox doctor. What if the ox dies? Is it your fault, or what if the ox gives birth? You get to keep the babies of the ox. And then all the other things that one might find. There's a whole host of complications, and that's why this is the more fun Gemara, a fun Talmud to learn with kids, because they can come up with all the circumstances. But here's the really interesting part of the circumstance. So the Mishnah, for example, tells us these are the items we have to proclaim, and these are the items we don't have to proclaim that fall into the category of finders, keepers. And the rule that the rabbis apply here, is if a reasonable person had lost this, would they come looking for it? So if I lose an ox, I probably would come looking for it because I can identify the ox. Suppose I'm shopping at Trader Joe's and the bottom falls out of my bag and a whole bunch of apples fall into the parking lot. Am I going to go back and reclaim those apples? That's the question. And if I would not be would I be obligated to give back those apples if I was the one who found them? So the rule here is something called yeush. Yeush means if a reasonable person would conclude that there's no chance I'm going to get back my apples, well, then you're not obligated to bring back the apples. You're not obligated to announce the apples. You gain possession of them the moment you find them. But if a reasonable person would be likely to come looking for them because there was some identifying marker in them, there was something special. They were apples, but they were in a special bag. They were apples, they were in a basket. They were a kind of apples that nobody else was buying that day. Well, then a reasonable person would come looking for them. Then I have to announce them and see if I can find the owner, which forces us to do something interesting. It forces me to think empathetically. It forces me to ask myself, what would I do if I were the person who lost this item? What would it be like to put myself into the moral shoes of the person who lost the item? And if I can put myself in the moral shoes of the person who lost the item, I can figure out what the morality is of the circumstance, which means that even in this very simple, very, very simple case of lost and found law, I'm being taught how to think with empathy, how to negotiate the world with a sense of getting out of my own self and imagining what another moral actor might be doing. And that's the education that the rabbis are trying to impose upon us. Mark, do we return these things or do we hold on to them?
Well, that was beautiful and really brilliant and right and a perfect summary of a part of the Parshat.
here
However,
it is. I was worried there for a minute.
The brilliance of the Torah is that we read from the last week's Parsha, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. It doesn't say justice, justice you shall do. And what you said sort of implies, this is the right thing to do. And in some of those cases, I think the rabbis are right. In some, I think they're wrong. I studied Baba Metzia also, and it starts out, Shnayim ochsim batalis v'yachloku. Two guys are grabbing the same talis, and what's the solution? You cut it in half. Well, that doesn't work. Then neither of them gets the talis. In any event, whether they're right or wrong, what they show is what was true in that great overarching statement of last week's Parsha, you shall pursue justice, not that you shall do it, because doing it, as you beautifully described, is really tough with all the complications that come in to making ethical decisions. It's very hard to know what the right thing to do is. There's almost no issue where it's simple. You know, in my other life, I'm Professor Gellman with a PhD in philosophy. And when I teach ethics classes, as I have done at Northwestern and elsewhere, so first thing I tell my students, who are supposedly really bright, I say, listen, just because you think something's right doesn't make it right. Their basic moral view is there is no right and wrong. Everybody has their own view of things. And I try and explain to them, yeah, Hitler too. So that doesn't work. Then I explain to them the one part of philosophy you can't dispense with. The only division, the only element of philosophy that you have to study and have to integrate into your life is ethics. There's others, epistemology, which is the branch of philosophy of how you know things, or there's metaphysics, which is the study of the structure of being as such. You can live a very happy life and not worry about being as such. But you cannot live a life without a functioning ethical theory. Now, your ethical theory might be corrupt. It might be do unto others before they do it to you. It might be, your ethical theory might be, Hobbesian. Each man is the wolf of his neighbor. And you have to protect yourself constantly against the predations of your neighbor. Or it could be biblical, that we should have empathy and we're made in the image of God. But what the Torah, even before the Talmud, where they had all this Greek information on logic and arguments and everything that Aristotle taught the world, even then, the Torah had nuance, right? So at the beginning of this Parsha, we have beautiful laws that teach you empathy. At the end of the Parsha, well, not exactly at the end, but further along in the Parsha, we have laws that tell you, forget your empathy. Forget your empathy. It would be the wrong thing to have empathy in this situation. And the situation they bring up, which is my choice for today, was Zachor et Amalek.
I'll put that up on the screen for you there.
Remember Amalek. There it is. Remember what Amalek did to you on the journey after you left Egypt? And this was his crime. How, undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary, and he attacked Hanechashalim Ahareha. He attacked the weak ones at the rear of the march, which means what it says, that if you're attacking a column of soldiers where the young, strong soldiers are in the front with their weapons, and the old people and the children are in the back, struggling to keep up, he attacked the back. He went around and he attacked the back because he knew he could kill more people that way. And in response to this war crime, because they had no weapons, and he killed them because they were defenseless, in response to this war crime, the Torah becomes brutal. Would not even be a wrong word to use. It becomes brutal. It says, you must wipe out Amalek's name, and from that, comes the commandment to kill all the Canaanites, the Amalekites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Girgashites, all the ites. They were killed. They were genocidally wiped out by command of God in the Torah. So this raises the question, is there a level of radical evil? Let's call it what it is. Because what Amalek did was radical evil. It wasn't just like most of the evil we do and most of the evil we see. Oh, you kept the baseball mitt. That would have been evil, but it's not that evil. You had an argument. It was a good argument, but it just wasn't that good. No, he didn't care. He left it there. Finders, keepers, losers, weepers. You had a theory, but this is radical evil. This is the murder. And we talk about the Holocaust sometimes, I fear, in way too generalized a way. I always try and make it more specific. When I was asked, because I was president of the New York Board of Rabbis during 9/11, they had 3 speeches at the memorial service. A Protestant, the Archbishop and Cardinal spoke, and then a Muslim spoke, and then I spoke. So I was representing the Jewish people. And I began my speech this way. 6,000 people, which is what we thought at the time on September 24th. We thought 6,000 people had been killed in the buildings. Turned out it was 3,000. I said 6,000 people did not die on that day. One person died on that day, 6,000 times. And I even got a note. I was so proud of this. Václav Havel wrote, he said that was the greatest line. You did a great speech because it personalized 9/11.
Right.
It didn't say, these are the numbers. So I try to personalize Amalek. And the thing about Amalek and the thing about Hitler is this. 1 out of every 3 Jews on planet Earth was murdered in a 5-year period by them, by Hitler and his cronies. 1 out of every 3 Jews on Earth was directly murdered in a 4 or 5-year period, essentially from Wannsee to the end of the war, from 41 to 45. That's 1 out of every 3. When Tommy Hartman and I would go out to the Dakotas and speak, and the audience had 1,000 people and no Jews, and they would ask me, why don't you give up on this Holocaust stuff? You're constantly beating people over the head with it. And I told them, the 1 out of 3. I asked a third of the audience to stand up. I said, if a third of you were killed on your way home, how soon would it take the rest of you to forget it? And they said, we'd never forget it. I said, well, that's where we are. So with Amalek, you have the greatest war crime perpetrated against the Jewish people until the Middle Ages, when 50,000 Jews were killed in Worms and Speyer in the First Crusade in 1098. What do you do about that? And what is justice? And what is revenge? Let's say we can all agree that revenge is bad because somehow it's excessive, right? Or it's directed to the wrong person. Maybe you kill the person's kids as an act of revenge, the person who hurt you. We can all, I think, intuitively agree that's wrong for a variety of reasons. But we also agree that justice is to be pursued. Well, what does justice mean in the case of Hitler? Let's say he hadn't killed himself. Or let's say he didn't kill himself and he's living somewhere in a Bierstube in Argentina, whatever. Let's suppose you got the guy. What do you do to him? You can't just, even if you just kill him, how does that equal 6 million? It doesn't.
Mhm.
So I'm reminded in this, the only person who ever had the guts to take up this issue in our modern culture is Quentin Tarantino, my favorite filmmaker, really, along with the Coen brothers. His 2 films on revenge and justice, which are identical, except one has to do with Black people and one has to do with Jews in the war and the Holocaust, are Django Unchained with Jamie Foxx, that's the Black person movie, and the Jewish one is Inglourious Bastards, which stars Brad Pitt in my favorite role as a Nazi hunter.
Right.
And they finally get him in a theater. And one of the scenes, rewriting history in both cases, it's an extended scene of them just shooting Hitler with machine guns for what seems like an hour. But it's like a few minutes.
Right.
And I asked myself at that scene, is that revolting? Or is there something satisfying in that? And I'm telling you straight now, just to keep our argument going, if we have one, I was not revolted by that. I was not revolted for a second. First of all, I knew it was a film, but okay. But even so, there was a saying on the wall in the Warsaw Ghetto, written in human blood, famous saying, in Yiddish, Yidden Nekoma. Yidden Nekoma means, in English, Jews take revenge for this. Take revenge for this. And I think that part of our ethical impulses, our natural, healthy, ethical impulses, is that certain acts are radical evil and they require something that looks like revenge. But I would argue, even if it is revenge, it's still morally justified because of the act. So what do you think, my friend?
So so I'll disagree with you to this extent, but I don't want to come off sounding so righteous, because there's a great deal
But
of
you
me
are
that,
righteous.
no, but there's a great
Everyone
deal
knows this.
there's
You're
a
the
great deal of
righteous
me
guy.
that agrees with you. I
I'm
remember
the
when Michael Dukakis, the governor of Massachusetts, ran for president. I think he ran against George H.W. Bush.
Yeah.
In one of the debates, one of the debate people said, "You're against capital punishment." And he
Right.
said,
The
yes.
rape.
And they said, "Yeah, suppose someone took your wife and brutally raped her. Wouldn't you want to get back at the son of a bitch? I mean, wouldn't you want to get the rapist?" And Dukakis, in his own typical way, sort of over-intellectualized it. Because the answer to the question is, of course I would. I love my wife with all my heart. To see her violated and hurt in that way, every impulse, every fiber of my being, I would want to wrap my hands around that guy's throat and kill him myself. But the answer is, that's what I would want. But civilization has taught me that that's not the way. And
are you sure of that?
Let's just to do that makes me him, makes me a killer, right? And I want to suggest that what you have here, let's put the thing back up on the screen, because I think is interesting. The text itself, I think, is so interesting, because it says something that's not immediately obvious, right? What the text is telling us is not just to destroy Amalek, not to destroy Amalek the people, but to destroy Amalek the evil. Look at the text for just a moment. Zachor et asher asalach Amalek. So you begin with the word Zachor. in English, remember, right? And it's going to end with the words, lo tishkach, don't forget. Those are the framing words of this section, right? And then the idea here is, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek. Now, of course, if you blot out the memory of Amalek, how is it that you're not going to forget? I mean, how do you remember if you're to blot out the memory? And by the way, just as an aside, as you well know, in Yiddish, for example, the great curse is Yimach Shemo. May his name be erased, right? That's the reason why you sound groggers at Purim, because Haman is a descendant of Amalek, and you want to blot out his name and blot out his memory, right? By making so much noise. I think that what's really being pushed here isn't just go out and annihilate a people. I think that what's told here is to go out and annihilate the evil that this people embraces. And in as much as the evil that this people demonstrated doesn't belong solely to them, but is a quality that finds itself all over human life, where the stragglers, the weak, the vulnerable are attacked, and that there's no mercy, there's no compassion, there's simple brutality and cruelty. That's what's being attacked here. So you're right. Listen, who of us wouldn't want to? That's what makes Tarantino's movies so satisfying, is we get to see what should have happened to Hitler. And Tarantino, who's a filmmaker, gets to kill him in a movie theater with film. That's how it happens. It's a brilliant retake of the story. Right? And how many of us wouldn't want to fantasize about being on that SEAL team that found Osama bin Laden and doing away with him? But the question isn't doing away with the guy. The question is doing away with that quality of evil that still today lives in this world, that still hasn't been pushed out of this world. And that's what's really being asked of you here. And and if you adopt those methods, so this is your tzedek tirdof argument that you offered us last week. If you adopt those methods, if you become as brutal as them, if you become obsessed with carrying out this revenge, then you become complicit in the carrying forward that very same brutality. And again, I know that sounds like a very California, righteous, and I don't mean to sound that way, but I think it's important to recognize that there's something deeper here than just go wipe out this people.
Okay, I buy that. And I know you're not sounding like, some ultra pacifist who thinks any act of violence.
No, I'm not.
I know, and neither am I. But so I want to unpack, I will accept completely the notion that some of what is in Amalek is in us, the desire to hurt people, then that not every mistake we make is an innocent mistake. That's an important thing for people to understand as the high holidays come along.
Right, and let me just interrupt you for a second, because that's a very, very important point. The Torah is timed in such a way that these parshiot are coming in Elul, and the holidays are coming. So one of the great questions is, are there unforgivable sins?
Yes.
Are there unforgivable sins?
I get this question all the time in my weekly column.
Yeah.
For Tribune, the God Squad. And I get it all the time, because Christianity has a certain category of unforgivable sins, which for them is very troubling, because their entire religion is based on the forgiveness of sin.
Right.
But and we don't have a category like that. For us, all sins can be forgiven and cleansed and purified.
Well, that's questionable, because some of the sins can only be cleansed by your death.
Yes, and that's my defense of capital punishment, by the way.
Right.
That the only way for a murderer to atone, if they don't want to atone, even if they want to, is to offer up their own life as a sacrifice,
right,
and as an atonement. And that's not Christian, because he's not atoning for anyone else, but it's the only way you can do it. But I accept the notion that there's evil in us, and that not everything we do is a mistake. Sometimes what we do to hurt people is intentional, and we need to be courageous enough to accept that. and to change that, and to get rid of the anger in us that causes us to brutalize our neighbor. However, there are in this world, we are forced to see almost weekly mass shootings and mass evil and the attack on Ukraine and the murder of children and the abuse of children and on and on. There's radical evil in our world.
Yes.
And if you catch someone who's, let's say, a child predator, and you catch him, and you're a crowd of people and you catch him in the act, what are you supposed to do? Hand him over to the police? Yeah, of course. But there's an impulse in you to just kill the MF, to just kill him.
Yeah.
And I want to open that and say, part of what it takes to have a moral society is the capacity to have moral outrage.
Okay.
Not just to say, oh, that's wrong. And not just to leap, which you didn't, but to leap immediately to, but if we do anything against him other than giving him 3 meals a day in prison and the Pell Grants to get a higher degree, and if we do anything other than that, we're at his level. No, you're not at his level. He did the crime. You caught him, and now the issue is, what is just punishment?
Mm-hmm.
But I do not believe that you can have a functioning society unless you have a vibrant and vital sense of compassion and empathy, which you mentioned and which the Torah has, and a vital and active sense of moral outrage, where you say, this cannot be. This cannot be, and we will. It wasn't the only thing that people can relate to on this, Ed, is of course the idea that of 9/11. I was so angry. I was not just sad that the people died. Of course I was. I was furious.
Well, there's 9/11, there's the shootings in all these schools.
Yes.
There's
but there you could say,
you have it right. I would.
there you could say it's a mentally ill kid.
No. There's a daily menu of outrageous evil, and I agree with you that moral outrage is part of it. I'm just suggesting that when the Torah tells us at the beginning, remember, and then it tells us to not forget, what it's telling us to do is to, first of all, look inside and recognize that many of us, that we all carry a piece of this rage, and we have to be very careful about it. And then second of all, that there's one thing to have moral outrage, but it's another thing to act on it. And that you're better than this, Mark. We're better than this. We're not going to fall to the level of burning witches and lopping off heads and crazy things that people have done through history. We've come to a level of civilization where we want to preserve our own neshamas, our own moral outrage. So let's finish with this. Yontif is coming, and we can agree to this. In the High Holiday liturgy, in the High Holiday mythology, God has two aspects. One is called din and one is called rachamim. Rachamim is what we've talked about as moral empathy, is compassion. And din is moral outrage. And it's the capacity to say, this is wrong and this must be eradicated. And something very affirmative has to be done to eradicate this evil, because that's what's called for by morality at this point. And the question of how you balance the two is really one of the great questions of the high holidays. So next week we will prepare for the holidays. We'll be speaking about the holidays. It's Parshat Ki Teitzei, but I think we're going to start thinking, as next week is already Slichus. We'll talk about the coming of the high holidays and the great themes of this holiday. Mark, I want to wish you a very good week. All right.
You too, Ed.
Be careful with all the lost objects you found. Okay. And if you do run across someone who was an Amalekite, try not to run them over with your car.
Okay, I will.
Okay. And to everyone who's listening, service from Valley Beth Shalom follows this Torah study. We want to wish you a very, very good week. Stay cool if you can. And Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.